because it's not enough to have the technology. I've been told you have to know, in essence, you have to have their instruction manual. And when I say instruction manual, it's not like you and I would think. But the thing is, Tom, people just have to ask themselves, what would cause the military to get there with such urgency, sequester the area, and then the reports of piecemeal technology? And we're talking stuff that's so vast in scope. And by the way, this is known to the Russians. I talked to, basically one of the foremost Russian giant hunters in the world. I mean, this guy's a famous eye surgeon, probably the most famous eye surgeon in the world, and everybody is looking for this stuff. It's the same thing when we hear that the underworld and the Mayan caves to the underworld or whatever. These people weren't just imagining or having hallucination. They were held in basically captivity, and some were raised for food crops. You know, this is a funny thing. Everybody has a hard time figuring out how the Mayans and to a large extent the Aztecs and Incas disappeared, you know. Well, they disappeared the same way the Easter Islanders did. They were eaten out of existence. And it used to be by the, good night, modern scientists said, they weren't cannibals. Well, not only were they cannibals, but it's what they worshipped that ate them, because a lot of sacrifices basically were prepared for these entities who had an insatiable appetite. And, it's so obvious by, in essence, what you and I are talking about, that these beings aren't, quote, unquote, vegetarians who, say, it's just another human, I mean, we're talking about some incredibly far-reaching stuff. Back to Babylon, back to the plains of Shinar. The situation is across the world, the greatest hunt, the most money spent, which brings us, why are the Chinese in Antarctica? All this stuff, Tom, what you and I are talking about is truly, as Dave Flynn's book, Temple at Center Time, is a Rosetta Stone for understanding the entire Newtonian prophetic significance of the temple. It's the location of Jerusalem. What you and I are talking about is basically the Rosetta Stone of history. It's architecture, it's language, it's customs, it's technology, because all this stuff that's new, and same thing with alien technology, isn't it amazing that the aliens, and we talked about this, they always have one thing in common with the incubus and succubus, as you brought up last time. They always are extracting body fluids or organs from their hosts or from their captives.
That's right. And this Gilgamesh or Nimrod is one of the historical examples behind what is important about DNA and genetic makeup. It is actually a story. Nimrod in the Bible is actually a story of a person being one thing and then changing into something else that allowed for something extraordinary to rise up into or to incarnate within him, to be reanimated within his blood system. And I can say that believing that this is a good interpretation of biblical history because of the extraordinary record in Genesis 10:8, where it says Nimrod began to be a Geborim. And you and I have talked about that before, this extraordinary piece of Scripture where it refers to a man starting to become a Geborim. George Norrie, the other night, I did this 3-hour show with him, and I said, George, not long ago, I began to be a diabetic. And it had to do with, with my poor choices of food, diet, and exercise. But the bottom line was that my doctor believed that I actually, Steve, triggered, if you will, a genetic inherent. And it began changing me in genetic and metabolic ways. And it's so powerful that now I have to take, medicines to keep it from killing me. That's how powerful it is. And so this is important. Just because I had the gene trait that would lead to diabetes didn't mean that I would become a diabetic, but it did mean that it was part of my genetics, my bloodline. But due to my decisions, the gene turned on, and it began changing me in powerful metabolic ways. And I've always wondered if this record of Nimrod, where it says he began to be a Geborim, wasn't indicative of something about him genetically, about the bloodline. Is this what these guys with this new contest, is this what they're looking for? the Archon
yes.
X prize, something inherent in the bloodline or in the genes. They're looking for it.
Yes, they are, and I'll tell you something interesting. The most fascinating thing I know is, and this will come as a real shock, I was told by some of the most brilliant men in the world, and I mean, when I say brilliant, I mean, tell me, Tom, if you know me well, you know I know a lot of people, but I was told that our DNA has a harmonic. Everybody's DNA, in essence, we are transmitters for a specific frequency, that these things hunt by the frequency of an individual's DNA. Likewise, when they can find the DNA of Gilgamesh or any of his brothers, and by the way, these fallen angels amongst themselves talk about the release of the brotherhood, okay? Isn't it interesting? We talk about the brotherhood of darkness, and I want to make this clear because God did speak the worlds into existence, sound, okay, by the word of the Lord.
Right.
The point is that these things hunted by the, and I don't know if you know this, by the sonic signature of each individual DNA. In other words, if they have my hair, whatever part of my DNA, okay, and that's the thing they home in on. It's like a homing signal. We're talking about advanced abilities that are so supernatural. Think about it. DARPA, Defense Advanced Research, they want to basically give their fighting super soldiers the eyes of eagles, the ability to smell like wolves, to be able to, run and not be weary.
Right.
Never sleep, all these things. But what we're talking about now is we're talking about all of this stuff that you and I are talking about, all the pre-existent technology, all the unearthed technology, all of the forbidden history, forbidden archaeology, all converging at this point in time, which brings me to the great deception. Suddenly, that's going to be unleashed upon the earth. Because of the importance of this, spell out for people how you see this playing out from everything we've talked about, over all the times that you've written, I've written, we've interviewed each other, talked to each other, on air, off air. But how do you see the great deception playing out now? Because, no offense, it's becoming so in our face, but most people can't relate to it.
Well, let me finish something and then take you to that. I've often wondered if this record of Nimrod, where it says he began to be a Geborim, wasn't indicative of something about him genetically. Now, this will, by the way, play into the Great Deception. Something inherent in his bloodline, his genes, and that because of his actions, and the Bible, his very name refers